great respect for each other's top games, like you mentioned.
Definitely.
And so neither of these guys are going to want to be underneath the other.
Victor joked in the press conference yesterday that we might see him do a Berimbolo. Maybe he wasn't joking. Maybe he was serious.
I hope so. That would be very exciting. For anyone who has not seen Joao Rocha over the years or is a little bit of a newer fan to jiu-jitsu here at the IBJJF, it's important to note that Joao Rocha has like more matches than I can think of with Buchecha than like anybody else, right? That may not be statistically correct, but that's how it feels because we've seen them go against each other a million times, especially in the finals of big events and semifinals of big events. So he is somebody that if you've been a fan of jiu-jitsu for a while, you have seen him on the mats just relentless with a lot of resilient performances as well. So it's really exciting to see him back after taking a break, especially against someone who has just come back recently and won some titles.
Yeah, like you mentioned, Joao's faced the elite of the elite at black belt since, I would say, around 2013, 2014. He was fighting Buchecha. Took that little bit of a break, but he's fought multiple generations of elite level black belts, which I think has definitely added to his game and added to his technical level.
It's also something that just really adds a layer of experience that's pretty impossible to recreate any other way. I mean, if you don't have those hours on the mats fighting the best people in the world and becoming one of the best people in the world yourself, it's one of the reasons why we talk about the level of experience with newcomers not coming in. Not saying at all that Victor Honório is one of those newcomers, because he's in the same boat himself, being an experienced veteran. But that's what makes this match interesting to me, is that both of these guys are experienced veterans. They're both very resilient in their matches, and they both have great strategy in a way that when it comes down to those split-second decisions that you have to make, whether it's on the edge of the mat or in a transition, we see that experience level come out with these guys and girls.
Victor Honório is the kind of competitor who oftentimes he'll jockey for position here with these grips, and then he'll explode into a takedown. So do not blink, because anything can happen in this match from the feet.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel the same about Victor's style when he's passing, right? So on
Yes,
the feet
absolutely.
or passing, yeah, he'll slow, kind of lull you into a false sense of security, and then he has a big cartwheel pass out of nowhere, right? So it's really exciting to watch him because you never really know what's going to happen.
Looks like Joao's grip on the collar is doing a good job keeping Victor Honório at bay and limiting his ability to close the distance and get to the legs. And they're going to get reset back into the center of the mat.
We're going to add a second penalty to each athlete here. So now there's also going to be a penalty and an advantage on the board added to each athlete. Now, as we know, if there were to be a third penalty called for these gentlemen, there would be 2 points put on the board, and then the max amount of penalties that we see is 3, because on the fourth one, there will be a DQ. Now, we don't see that very often, but it's important because it changes the mentality of athletes as the penalties start to add up, because they know that there's a threat of disqualification, and so that's a lot of times when we see big risky movements and big exchanges.
Yeah, definitely forces them to push the pace. I think we're seeing a little bit of a change in the pace already so far after the first 2 penalties.
Yeah, that was a particular movement there, I think, executed by Joao Rocha, where it looked like he was going in for some foot sweeps, where we saw some different action on the feet, where a lot of times we'll see athletes try to sweep one way or the other, and then as one of the other athletes' foot comes up, they will reach forward into a foot sweep. So definitely very judo style. We know that Joao Rocha has great takedowns, both wrestling style and judo style, so I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more of that. It just takes a split second of having the foot placement correct, and then you can get a big action out of those foot sweeps. It's very dramatic, it's very exciting, and of course, it scores those 2 points and puts us in a top position.
Yeah, Joao's grips and even his posture seem to indicate that he could potentially be going for those foot sweeps or some judo-style takedown.
Looks like we're going to see a third penalty here for these gentlemen. Like you mentioned earlier, Danny, here at these Grand Prix and Crown events, we do have a 10-second rule around the penalties for inactivity, which is a little faster than normal. So it's exciting. It's a lot of pressure on the athletes, but it's exciting for the fans because it means we're definitely going to get to see some action, especially, as we mentioned, now that there are 3 penalties on the board, the next penalty would potentially be a disqualification. So neither of these athletes can afford another penalty. And I've only personally seen it one time in history where there was a double disqualification, but that can happen. If they were both to be called for another penalty the same way they just were, that's what we would see. Now, again, knowing these athletes, knowing their history and knowing their level of experience, I don't think we're going to see that. They know that now it's really on the wire, and we see a big attempt there from Victor Honório. It looked like he sat through. It's kind of a fireman style, but with the hand on the outside, so it's like a sweeping single that looks like a fireman. Tried to go underneath and through. Got some big sprawling action from Joao Rocha, and it was right there on the edge, so they'll be reset. But exciting to know that these guys are now going to get into it.
Interesting that exchange played out on the edge of the mat. Could have been a very different outcome had they been more towards the center of the mat.
And it's, you know, I'm glad you said that, Danny, because we see sometimes people get a lot braver on the edge of the mat because they may feel that if they miss their shot, then they will just be reset. So it's not quite as risky, right? So it's easy to take some action there. We see that a lot now. I've also seen that go negatively, right, where it kind of looks like they end up fleeing the mat, and then they can get penalized for that, and that can't happen in this situation because someone will be disqualified. So they've got to be careful with their strategy there. So I believe that we'll see some action on the inside of the mat here because they know the risks. Wow, we see some big snaps into a drop seo attempt there from Joao Rocha. Had some snaps, looked like he was, the drop seo takedown is when you bring your arm underneath your opponent's arm, you turn your back to them, drop to your knees and try to pull them over the back. It's very risky in jiu-jitsu though, because we have the back position. We see people get their back taken from that exact takedown, but Joao Rocha went for it. Victor Honório had a great balance there, great base, didn't go over the top, and they were on the edge, so they ended up going out, and now we have a reset in the middle. But it's really good to know that Joao Rocha is definitely not looking to add another penalty to the scoreboard.
We've talked about Victor Honório's explosiveness. That was pretty impressive explosion from Joao Gabriel Rocha there with that drop Sainagi attempt.
Now this is indicative of potentially going in for a fireman of his own when Joao Rocha pulls the collar like that, because as he opens up, he almost can like turn his body side to side with Victor Honório and then slingshot himself back in underneath the leg. Didn't quite see that happen, but it looked like the setup was coming a couple times. Now they have been battling a lot with these collar grips, but because they're even on the collar grips, Victor Honório with his right hand on the inside and then Joao Rocha over the top with his left hand, it becomes very difficult to get in underneath somebody's legs because of the stiff arm effect that arm creates. So I think that's why we're starting to see some more judo. We saw Victor Honório bring his arm over the top and try to clear Joao Rocha's grip, not unable to, but did attempt there. So I think we're seeing a lot more judo action here from these guys because those stiff arms make it difficult to get underneath the legs. It's a lot of ground to cover, especially with a heavy opponent. It's a lot of distance to cover to get your knees all the way from where they are to underneath your opponent's hip without getting sprawled on and without getting overexposed. Both these athletes know, as highly accomplished veterans, that they don't want to dive in on a shot with their head exposed, right, and get sprawled on and get their back taken, guillotined, or anything like that. I've seen a call from the referee here. See what the referees have decided. It's hard to say if there is one penalty here or a double penalty. Wow, there is a double penalty here and a double DQ in the ultra heavyweight division of the Crown in our first round, which means that Eric Muniz And Roosevelt Souza will, by default, be the final of the ultra heavyweight division.
We did see some takedown attempts, but there was a lot of jockeying for grips. They got the penalties, and there was a lot of jockeying for grips. They got the penalties, and we saw a little.
Hosha, right?